On a freezing winter morning, a frightened little girl hid on a porch, whispering, "Please don't tell her I'm here." When a lonely millionaire stopped to help, he uncovered a truth that would change both their lives forever. Because sometimes saving a child means confronting the past you tried to escape. Portland had a strange kind of silence when it snowed. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind. The kind that made every sound feel louder than it should be. That morning, the sky hung low and gray above the neighborhood. Snow drifted slowly across the quiet street, settling on porches and rooftops like a thin white blanket. Most people were still inside, warm, safe, but not everyone. Behind a cracked wooden flower pot on the porch of a small craftsman house, a little girl sat curled into herself. She couldn't have been older than 6. Her thin hoodie was soaked through. Her bare knees were red from the cold. Snow clung to her tangled brown hair. She pressed both arms tightly around her stomach, trying to stop the shaking. But it wasn't only the cold that made her tremble. A small cut on her wrist had soaked through the sleeve of her hoodie, darkening the fabric. She wiped it quickly. Not because it hurt, because she didn't want anyone to notice. The girl kept glancing at the driveway every few seconds, waiting, listening, praying the car wouldn't come back. Then footsteps approached through the snow. Crunch, crunch. A tall man walked slowly down the sidewalk, a Labrador trotting beside him. Cole Harrington walked this route every morning. Same street, same silence, same routine. Routine was easier. Routine meant he didn't have to think about the life he had lost 3 years ago. Rusty suddenly stopped. The dog's ears lifted. A low, uncertain bark escaped his throat. Cole sighed softly. "Come on, boy." But Rusty didn't move. Instead, he stared toward the porch. Cole followed the dog's gaze. At first, he thought it was a pile of coats. Then it moved. A tiny figure shifted behind the flower pot. Cole froze. A little girl sat there, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her eyes were wide with fear, and when she saw him looking at her, she whispered something so quietly the falling snow almost swallowed the words. "Please, don't tell her I'm here." Cole crouched slowly, careful not to get too close. He had learned long ago that frightened children moved like wounded animals. Too fast, and they ran. "Hey," he said gently. "Are you lost?" The girl shook her head immediately. Her eyes darted to the front door of the house behind her, then back to Cole. She whispered again, "Please don't tell her." Cole felt something twist in his chest. Tell who? The girl hesitated. Her small fingers dug into her sleeves. "My aunt." Snowflakes clung to her eyelashes as she looked down at the porch floor. Cole noticed the bruise beneath her eye. Yellowing, old. But the marks around her wrist looked newer. Much newer. Rusty slowly walked forward and sat beside the girl, tail gently brushing the snow. The girl flinched at first. Then she carefully touched the dog's ear. Her voice trembled. "She says I'm not allowed inside when she goes out." Cole stared at the dark house behind her. "How long have you been sitting here?" The girl shrugged. "I don't know." Her lips had turned slightly blue. Cole instinctively reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call someone who can help you." The reaction was instant. The girl grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, her eyes filled with panic. "No." Her voice cracked. "Please don't call the police." Cole blinked. Why tears welled in her eyes. Last time they came. She waited until they left. The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then she beat me worse." The words hung in the frozen air. Cole slowly lowered the phone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Snow kept falling. The girl pulled her knees tighter to her chest. "I'll just wait here," she murmured. "I'm used to it." And suddenly, Cole realized something that made his stomach twist. This wasn't a bad morning. This was normal. Cole Harrington had spent 3 years learning how not to care. It was easier that way. After the accident. After the night he heard sirens on the highway and chose not to stop because he assumed someone else already had. After discovering that the wrecked car belonged to his wife and 8-year-old daughter. Cole built a quiet life, a routine, a wall. Every morning he walked this street pretending the world wasn't asking anything of him. But now a little girl sat freezing on a porch 10 feet away, and she was begging not to be seen. Cole swallowed. "Can I at least get you something warm?" The girl shook her head quickly. "If I'm not here when she comes back, she'll be mad." Cole looked at the thin porch roof above her. Barely any shelter. "Okay," he said finally. "Then we do it your way." The girl glanced up. "You stay here." He pointed toward his house 2 doors down. "I'll bring the warm stuff to you." The girl studied him carefully. Children who had been hurt often learn to read people faster than adults. Finally, she nodded. Cole stood and walked toward his house. But halfway across the yard, he stopped. His hand tightened around the phone in his pocket. Because deep down, he already knew something. If that front door opened, if the person inside that house really was hurting her, then today wasn't going to be a quiet morning. Today might change everything. Behind him, the little girl hugged herself tighter against the cold and whispered a sentence that Cole didn't hear. "I can't take her beatings anymore." Cole had just stepped back onto the porch with a wool blanket and a thermos of hot chocolate when the sound reached them. A car engine. Loud. Rough. Too fast for a quiet street. Hannah froze. Her entire body stiffened instantly like a deer hearing a predator. The thermos slipped slightly in her hands. Cole followed her gaze toward the end of the street. Headlights swung sharply into the driveway. The car stopped crookedly. Music thumped from inside the vehicle before the engine cut. 2 men climbed out first, laughing loudly. One nearly slipped on the icy driveway. They smelled of smoke and alcohol even from across the street. Then the passenger door slammed. A woman stepped out. Mid-30s. Heavy makeup smeared under tired eyes. A cheap faux fur coat hung loosely around her shoulders. Tanya Brooks, Hannah's aunt. Hannah's fingers tightened around the blanket. Her breathing turned shallow. "No. No. No." Cole saw the fear before he even saw the woman's face clearly. Tanya staggered slightly toward the house, fumbling with her keys. One of the men laughed. "Your kid's still outside." Tanya rolled her eyes. "That brat knows the rules." She shoved the door open. Then her eyes landed on the porch. On Hannah. Her expression changed instantly. "What the hell do you think you're doing out here where people can see you?" Hannah shrank backward. "I'm sorry, I was just cold." Tanya stormed across the porch. "You trying to make me look bad?" Her hand shot out and grabbed Hannah's arm. Hard. The girl cried out, not loudly, but the sound was raw, the kind that came from pain that had happened too many times. Across the street, curtains shifted. Neighbors were watching. But no one moved. Cole felt something inside him snap. For 3 years he had trained himself not to get involved, not to interfere, not to care too much. But when Tanya yanked Hannah upright by the arm, something in Cole's chest ignited. Hannah whimpered. "Please, I'll be good." Tanya shook her once violently. "You embarrass me like this." Hannah's sleeve slid back. Cole saw it clearly now. Dark bruises, layered marks. Some old, some fresh. His jaw tightened. Tanya leaned down close to Hannah's ear. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "You think anybody cares about you?" Hannah's shoulders trembled. "Nobody's coming," and that was when the girl broke. The sob tore out of her chest like something trapped inside her for years. "I can't take her beatings anymore." The street went silent. Even the men by the car stopped laughing. Cole stepped off the sidewalk. Crunch. Snow shifted under his boots as he crossed the street. Tanya looked up. Who the hell are you? Cole's voice stayed calm, low, controlled. The neighbor. He stepped onto the porch. And that's enough. Tanya scoffed. This is my niece. She yanked Hannah's arm again. Mind your own business. Cole stepped between them, not aggressively, just enough to block her reach. She's not your punching bag. Tanya laughed bitterly. Oh, please. You think you're a hero, Cole held her gaze. No. He gestured slightly toward Hannah. I just care. For a moment, Tanya looked like she might swing at him instead. Then sirens echoed faintly somewhere in the distance. Someone had finally called. Police lights painted the snow red and blue as the cruiser turned onto the street. Tanya's confidence evaporated instantly. This isn't over, she spat. You think this makes you a hero? She shoved Hannah backward one last time before stepping away. Officers approached quickly. One of them, Officer Diaz, took in the scene immediately. The shaking child, the bruises, the terrified eyes. His jaw tightened. Ma'am, step away from the girl. Tanya started shouting. She lies. She always lies. But the officers had already seen enough. They placed her in handcuffs. The men by the car slipped quietly into the background. An ambulance arrived minutes later. A paramedic wrapped a blanket around Hannah's shoulders. But the girl refused to let go of Cole's coat. Her small hands clutched the fabric tightly. They're going to take me, she whispered. Cole crouched beside her. Snowflakes melted slowly in her tangled hair. No, he said gently. They're going to help you. Her voice trembled. They'll send me away. Cole hesitated. Because the truth was, they might. He looked at the ambulance, then back at the girl clinging to his coat. 3 years ago, he had heard sirens and stayed where he was. He had told himself someone else would handle it. He had lived with that decision every day since. Cole placed a hand carefully on Hannah's shoulder. You're not disappearing, he said quietly. Not today. Hannah searched his face. For the first time since he had met her, a tiny piece of the fear in her eyes loosened. The ambulance doors opened. Snow continued to fall softly over the silent street, and Cole Harrington realized something he could no longer ignore. If he walked away now, he wouldn't just be leaving a child behind. He would be choosing to become the man he hated most. The kind who heard a child begging for help and kept walking. The ambulance doors shut with a heavy metallic thud, sealing Hannah inside a world of harsh white lights and antiseptic air. Cole stood just outside for a moment, snow melting slowly on his coat as he watched through the glass. Hannah sat on the narrow bench with the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her small hands gripping the edge of the fabric like it might disappear if she loosened her hold. When she noticed him through the fogging window, her fingers pressed softly against the glass. Cole tapped once in return. Not a wave, not a promise he couldn't keep. Just a quiet message, I'm still here. Inside the emergency room, the air smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. Machines beeped softly in tired rhythms while nurses moved with calm efficiency. A doctor with kind, steady eyes examined Hannah gently, narrating every step before touching her, as if she knew sudden movements might shatter the fragile trust the girl was holding on to. Cole waited in the hallway back against the wall, staring at the pale tile floor. His mind kept replaying the moment on the porch. The bruises, the terror in Hannah's eyes, the way she had clung to his coat like it was the only solid thing in the world. After a while, the doctor stepped outside. She'll be okay tonight, she said quietly. But some of those injuries aren't new. Cole felt the words settle heavily in his chest. We'll file a report with Child Protective Services. What happens to her? He asked. The doctor hesitated before answering. That depends on what CPS finds. If there's no safe family member. She paused gently. Kids like Hannah sometimes move around a lot. Cole nodded slowly, though the idea left a hollow ache in his stomach. A social worker arrived shortly after Lauren Kim. She carried a worn leather folder and spoke with the straightforward tone of someone who had spent years dealing with hard realities. "We'll find emergency placement tonight," she explained. "A foster home until we evaluate the situation." Hannah sat quietly during the conversation, her feet dangling above the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "I'll be good." Lauren softened slightly. "I know you will." But Hannah didn't look convinced. Her eyes moved slowly toward Cole. "Are they taking me somewhere far?" The room grew quiet. Cole crouched beside her. "They're trying to keep you safe." Hannah nodded slowly, accepting the words without truly believing them, because in her experience, safe never lasted very long. Hours later, the hospital corridor had grown quieter. The bright emergency lights felt harsher against the deepening night outside the windows. Hannah sat in a small consultation room with Rusty lying patiently at her feet. Cole had insisted the dog stay with her, and surprisingly the staff allowed it after seeing how the girl relaxed whenever she touched the Labrador's fur. Lauren returned with a stack of paperwork. "We're still trying to locate a placement," she said gently. "It might take a little while." Hannah's fingers tightened around Rusty's collar. She had heard those words before. "We're still trying. It might take a while." To adults, they sounded calm and reasonable. To children like Hannah, they meant something else entirely. "You're going somewhere unfamiliar." Again. Later that night, while Lauren stepped out to make another call, Hannah quietly slid off her chair and wandered toward the hallway. She didn't mean to listen. But adult voices drifted through the partially open door of the nurse's station. Temporary foster intake available across the county. No immediate relatives approved. Transfer paperwork in the morning. The words blurred together. But Hannah understood enough. They were sending her away. Somewhere far. Somewhere she would be alone again. Her chest tightened as memories surfaced: unfamiliar houses, angry voices, the constant fear of doing something wrong. She stepped backward quietly, her breath shaking. When Cole returned a few minutes later with 2 cups of hot chocolate, he found her standing near the window, staring out into the snowy parking lot. "Hannah." She didn't turn around. "They're sending me away," she whispered. Cole set the cups down. "They're just trying to find somewhere safe. That's what they always say." Her voice cracked. "And then nobody comes back." For a moment, Cole didn't know what to say, because the truth was, the system wasn't always gentle, and sometimes children like Hannah did disappear into it. Near midnight, the hospital had grown nearly silent. Most of the staff had changed shifts, and the long corridors were filled with the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Cole stepped outside briefly to take a phone call from his lawyer, leaving Rusty sleeping beside Hannah's chair. When he returned 5 minutes later, the chair was empty. Rusty stood up immediately, ears alert. Hannah, no answer. Cole's chest tightened. He moved quickly through the hallway, scanning each corner. The front entrance doors slid open automatically as he approached. Outside, snow drifted gently through the cold night air. And there, at the far edge of the parking lot, he saw a small figure walking toward the street. Hannah, the girl, stopped. Slowly, she turned around. Her face was streaked with tears. "I didn't want them to take me somewhere else," she said quietly. Cole walked toward her carefully, his boots crunching softly in the snow. "Running away won't keep you safe." Hannah wiped her face with her sleeve. "It's better than being sent away again." Cole knelt in front of her. 3 years ago, he had chosen distance. He had chosen silence. But this time he spoke without hesitation. "You're not disappearing." Hannah looked up at him. "How do you know?" Cole held her gaze. "Because if they try to send you somewhere else." He paused, the decision forming fully for the first time. "Then you're coming home with me." For the first time that night, the fear in Hannah's eyes loosened just a little. Snow continued falling quietly around them, And somewhere deep inside, Cole Harrington realized something undeniable. This story wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. Morning arrived quietly over Portland, but the quiet didn't last long. By the time Cole drove Hannah home from the hospital, something had already begun spreading beyond the small street where everything started. A neighbor's phone video, shaky, filmed from behind a curtain, had captured part of the confrontation on the porch. The moment when Hannah cried, "I can't take her beatings anymore." The moment Cole stepped between her and Tanya. By sunrise, the clip had already traveled across social media, and by mid-morning, news vans were parked outside Cole Harrington's office building downtown. Reporters stood in the cold, holding microphones, their voices carrying across the sidewalks as they repeated the same headline with different tones of curiosity and suspicion. Millionaire CEO steps in to rescue abused child. Some called him a hero. Others asked harder questions. Why would a wealthy man suddenly take responsibility for a child he had never met before? Was this compassion or something else? Inside the quiet glass house 2 streets away from the porch where it began, Hannah sat carefully at the kitchen table while Rusty lay across her feet like a living blanket. She held the warm mug Cole had poured her, but barely drank. The house felt enormous to her, every sound echoing softly through rooms that had once been silent for years. Cole stood near the window, looking at the phone in his hand as it buzzed again and again. Messages from colleagues, investors, board members, some supportive, some cautious. One from his lawyer simply read, "Turn on the news." Cole didn't. Instead, he looked back toward the kitchen table where Hannah sat trying to make herself small again, exactly the way she had on the porch. He realized something important in that moment. The story had left the street. It had entered the world, and the world was rarely gentle with complicated truths. Hannah finally spoke without looking up. "Are they mad at you because of me?" Cole crossed the room and sat down across from her. "No," he said quietly. "People are just curious." She nodded slowly, though her fingers tightened around the mug. "Whenever adults get curious," she whispered, "kids like me usually end up somewhere else." Cole didn't answer immediately, because deep down he knew something she didn't yet. The world had started watching, and once the world started watching, everything became harder. 2 days later, the first legal notice arrived. It came in a plain envelope delivered by courier just after noon, the kind of envelope that carried quiet but serious consequences. Cole opened it slowly at the kitchen counter, while Hannah colored on a sheet of paper beside Rusty. The document was brief but sharp in its meaning. Tanya Brooks had hired a public defender and filed a motion to contest emergency custody. She was claiming the entire situation had been exaggerated. According to her statement, Hannah was a troubled child, prone to lying and running away, and Cole Harrington had interfered with a family matter that was none of his business. Cole read the page twice, feeling the tension gather slowly in his shoulders. Across the table, Hannah looked up, sensing the change in the room, the way children often do before adults say a word. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Cole folded the paper. "Your aunt wants the court to review what happened." Hannah's crayon stopped moving. For several seconds, she didn't say anything at all. Then she asked the question that had clearly been living in her mind since the hospital. "Does that mean I have to go back?" Cole walked around the table and knelt beside her chair. "No one is sending you anywhere today," he said gently. But even as he spoke, the reassurance he knew the next few weeks could become complicated. Tanya might not have much credibility, but the legal system was designed to examine every possibility. And now there was another complication, the media attention surrounding him. Late that afternoon, Cole's lawyer, Avery Grant, arrived at the house carrying a tablet and a tight expression. "You've become a headline," she said bluntly. "Some people love the story. Others think it looks strange." She placed the tablet on the counter. A news panel discussion filled the screen. One commentator was saying, "We should ask why a wealthy man suddenly wants guardianship of a child he isn't related to." Avery lowered the volume. "They're going to question your motives," she continued. "Publicly." Hannah was sitting quietly on the couch nearby, pretending to watch Rusty play with a toy, but clearly listening to every word. Cole looked at Avery calmly. "Then we answer the questions." Avery studied him carefully. "Cole, this could become a legal fight." He glanced toward the small girl on the couch, who had begun drawing again, her crayon moving slowly across the paper. "Then we fight," he said. That night, the house grew quiet earlier than usual. Rain had replaced the snow outside, tapping softly against the tall windows of the living room, while the city lights shimmered faintly across the wet pavement. Hannah had been quieter than normal since Avery's visit. She ate dinner politely, thanked Cole twice, and even laughed when Rusty slid across the kitchen floor chasing a tennis ball. But there was a distance behind her eyes now, the careful distance of a child preparing herself for disappointment. Around midnight, Cole woke to a sound in the hallway. Not loud, just the soft creak of a floorboard. He sat up immediately. The house had been silent for years before Hannah arrived. He knew every sound it could make. He stepped into the hallway and saw a small figure near the front door. Hannah stood there with her repaired backpack slung over one shoulder. Her shoes were already on. She froze when she saw him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain continued tapping against the windows. Finally, Cole said softly, "Where are you going?" Hannah looked down at the floor. "I heard your lawyer," she whispered. "You're going to have problems because of me." Cole leaned against the wall, crossing his arms gently instead of blocking the door. "So your solution is to run away?" She nodded once. "If I leave before the court decides, then nobody has to argue about me." The words were simple, but they landed heavily in the quiet house. Cole walked slowly toward her until he stood only a few feet away. "Hannah," he said carefully, "when people fight in court about kids like you, it's not because you're a problem." She looked up with uncertain eyes. Then why Cole answered honestly, "Because sometimes the truth matters enough to fight for." Hannah stared at him for a long moment, rainlight reflecting faintly in her eyes. "Has anyone ever fought for you before?" he asked. She shook her head. Cole reached for the backpack strap and gently lifted it off her shoulder. "Then maybe it's time someone did." Hannah hesitated, the tension slowly leaving her shoulders as she stepped back from the door. For the first time since the legal battle began, the fear inside her loosened slightly. Outside, the rain continued falling softly over Portland. Inside the quiet house, the fight for Hannah had truly begun. The courthouse in downtown Portland felt colder than the winter streets outside, not because of the weather, but because of the tension that lived inside its walls. Cole Harrington stood near the long wooden bench outside courtroom 4B, hands resting calmly in the pockets of his coat, while reporters whispered a few yards away. Cameras had followed him from the parking garage to the courthouse entrance, their flashes cutting through the gray morning like lightning. The story had grown larger than anyone expected. Millionaire CEO seeks custody of abused child had become the headline of the week, and with headlines came speculation, debate, and strangers forming opinions about lives they had never witnessed. Cole had ignored them all. He had learned long ago that noise from the outside world rarely helped the truth speak any clearer. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was quieter, but no less intense. The polished wood benches were nearly full. A few reporters sat in the back rows, notebooks ready. Lauren Kim from Child Protective Services sat beside a stack of documents near the witness stand. At the opposite table sat Tanya Brooks, her expression tight with resentment, as she whispered with her public defender. Her eyes moved repeatedly toward Cole with a look that mixed anger and humiliation. To her, this entire situation had become an insult. Hannah sat beside her court-appointed child advocate near the front row. She wore a small blue sweater that Cole had bought the night before, her hands folded carefully in her lap, while Rusty waited outside with a volunteer from the courthouse security office. Hannah had insisted the dog stay close to the building even if he couldn't come inside the courtroom. Cole understood why. Rusty had become the one constant presence that made the world feel less threatening. When the bailiff finally called the room to order, the quiet deepened instantly. Judge Morrison entered with the slow authority of someone used to carrying heavy decisions. His expression was stern but not unkind, as he took his seat behind the bench and reviewed the documents before him. The case, he announced calmly, concerned the temporary guardianship of a minor child removed from an allegedly abusive home environment. The first witness called was Lauren Kim. She spoke carefully and clearly, describing the events that had led to Hannah's removal from her aunt's custody. She detailed the injuries recorded by the hospital and the statements given by neighbors who had heard shouting and crying on previous nights. When the opposing attorney questioned her, he attempted to suggest that Hannah's accusations might have been exaggerated or misunderstood. Lauren did not raise her voice. She simply repeated the facts. A 6-year-old child had been found outside in freezing temperatures, with visible injuries and clear signs of long-term neglect. The courtroom remained quiet while she spoke. No one interrupted, because sometimes the truth, when spoken plainly, carried more weight than arguments. When Lauren stepped down, the judge turned his attention to the next witness. "Call Mrs. Patel," the bailiff announced. Across the courtroom, a small, elderly woman rose slowly from the bench where she had been waiting. She held her purse tightly in both hands as she walked toward the witness stand. Her eyes briefly met Hannah's before she sat down and took the oath. The room seemed to lean forward in anticipation, because the story was only beginning to unfold. Mrs. Patel adjusted her glasses as she settled into the witness chair, her hands trembling slightly against the wooden rail in front of her. She had lived across the street from Tanya Brooks for nearly 5 years, and during that time she had witnessed more than she ever wished to see. At first, she told the court quietly, she had assumed the noise was ordinary family conflict. Arguments between adults, occasional shouting, doors slamming late at night. But over time, the sounds had changed. The voice she heard most often was not Tanya's, but Hannah's, crying and pleading, sometimes begging for the shouting to stop. The courtroom remained still as Mrs. Patel described nights when music and loud voices filled the house while the child was left outside or alone in the yard. She spoke of bruises she had noticed on Hannah's arms when the girl passed her mailbox on the way to school. She admitted she had once called Child Protective Services months earlier, but had been told the case could not proceed without direct evidence. When the opposing attorney began his cross-examination, he attempted to challenge her reliability. Perhaps she had misunderstood what she heard. Perhaps she had misinterpreted a normal family argument. Mrs. Patel shook her head firmly. "No," she said softly but clearly. "You do not mistake the sound of a child begging for someone to stop hurting them." The words echoed through the room. The lawyer paused briefly before continuing his questions, but the tension in the courtroom had shifted. Next, the hospital physician who examined Hannah took the stand. She explained the medical findings with careful professionalism. The bruising pattern on Hannah's arms and back was not consistent with accidental injury. Some marks appeared older, layered over time, suggesting repeated trauma rather than a single event. She also confirmed that the girl showed signs of prolonged exposure to cold the night she was found outside. The judge listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. Tanya Brooks, sitting at the defense table, stared forward with a stiff expression, refusing to look at Hannah. When the doctor finished the defense, attorney attempted one final strategy. He suggested that the presence of Cole Harrington might have influenced Hannah's statements to investigators. "Children sometimes repeat what adults want to hear," he argued carefully. But the doctor responded calmly. "Children who have been harmed often hesitate to speak at all." When she stepped down, The room fell into a moment of silence. Judge Morrison glanced toward the prosecution table. "Call the next witness." The bailiff looked down at his list. Mr. Cole Harrington. Cole stood slowly and walked to the witness stand, aware that every eye in the room had turned toward him. Reporters leaned forward slightly, pens ready. Tanya finally looked up, her expression sharp with hostility. Cole placed his hand on the Bible and took the oath. Then he sat. For a moment, the courtroom waited, because everyone knew his testimony might decide what happened next. When Cole Harrington began speaking, his voice was calm and steady, the same controlled tone he used in boardrooms when discussing multi-million-dollar decisions. But the words he chose were not about business. They were about a cold winter morning and a little girl sitting alone on a porch trying to make herself invisible. He described walking his dog, noticing the shape behind the flower pot, and hearing the whisper that had changed everything. "Please don't tell her I'm here." As he spoke, the courtroom grew quieter with every sentence. He explained how Hannah had refused to let him call the police because the last time someone reported the abuse, she had been punished afterward. He described the moment Tanya returned and grabbed the child's arm, the bruises he had seen, the fear in Hannah's eyes. When the defense attorney began his cross-examination, he shifted the focus toward Cole's personal life. "Mr. Harrington," the lawyer said carefully, "is it true that you lost your wife and daughter in an accident 3 years ago?" Cole nodded once. The courtroom remained silent. "Would you agree," the lawyer continued, "that this tragedy may have affected your judgment in situations involving children?" It was the question many critics had already asked publicly. Cole did not react with anger. Instead, he answered honestly. "Yes," he said. "It changed my life completely." The lawyer leaned slightly forward. "So isn't it possible that what you're doing now is an emotional reaction rather than a rational decision?" For the first time, Cole paused before answering. His gaze moved briefly across the room until it found Hannah sitting beside her advocate, small hands folded in her lap. Then he looked back at the judge. "3 years ago," he said quietly, "I heard sirens on the highway near my house. I assumed someone else would handle whatever had happened, so I stayed where I was. Later that night, I learned the accident involved my wife and daughter." A ripple of silence moved through the courtroom. Cole continued, his voice steady. "Since that day, I have lived with the knowledge that sometimes the worst decisions are the ones we make by doing nothing." The lawyer said nothing. Judge Morrison removed his glasses, briefly studying the man before him. "And what exactly are you asking this court to allow?" the judge asked. Cole answered without hesitation. "The chance to give Hannah a safe place to live while you determine what happens next." The judge looked toward the child sitting quietly in the front row. "And are you prepared for the responsibilities that come with that?" Cole nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." For several seconds, the courtroom remained completely still. Then Judge Morrison placed his glasses back on and spoke the words everyone had been waiting to hear. "This court will grant temporary guardianship to Mr. Harrington pending continued review by Child Protective Services." Hannah's breath caught sharply as the meaning of the decision settled over the room. Cole exhaled slowly for the first time in what felt like days. But as the gavel struck the wood of the bench, it was clear that the story was far from over. It had only entered its next chapter. The first morning after the court's decision arrived quietly, almost cautiously, as if the house itself wasn't quite sure how to behave. For 3 years, the glass-walled home at the end of the street had existed in careful silence. Cole Harrington had grown used to that silence. It had become a kind of armor around him, protecting him from memories that still felt too sharp to touch. But that morning, the silence broke in small, unexpected ways. A soft creak from the hallway, the faint sound of footsteps that were lighter than his own, the clumsy thud of Rusty's tail hitting the wall as the dog wagged enthusiastically beside someone much smaller. Cole stood in the kitchen pouring coffee when Hannah appeared in the doorway, wearing the oversized sweatshirt he had given her the night before. The sleeves hung far past her hands, but she didn't seem to mind. She hovered near the doorway, as if unsure whether she was allowed to enter fully. "Good morning," Cole said gently. Hannah nodded, but didn't speak right away. Her eyes moved carefully around the room, taking in details she hadn't noticed the night before. The tall windows, the quiet furniture, the framed photograph near the sink. When her gaze landed on the picture, she hesitated. It showed a smiling girl about 8 years old holding an ice cream cone that was melting down her wrist. Cole noticed Hannah studying it and walked over slowly. "That's Maddie," he said softly. "My daughter." Hannah looked down quickly, worried she had asked a question she wasn't supposed to ask. "She looks happy," the girl whispered. Cole nodded. She was. The moment lingered quietly before Rusty nudged Hannah's leg with his nose, demanding attention. The dog's interruption broke the tension, and Hannah knelt to rub his ears. For the first time since entering the house, a small smile appeared on her face. Later that afternoon, Cole showed her the room she could use while CPS completed their review. The room had once been an office, but he had cleared the desk away and placed a small bed beside the window. Hannah stood in the doorway looking uncertain. "Is this really mine?" she asked. Cole nodded. "For as long as you need it." Hannah stepped inside, slowly touching the blanket, as if testing whether the moment was real. That night, when Cole passed the hallway, he noticed something new hanging on the refrigerator door, a drawing made with bright crayons. It showed a tall stick figure beside a smaller one and a large dog between them. Above the figures, Hannah had written 3 careful words: "Me, Rusty, Cole." Cole stood there for a long moment looking at the drawing. The house that had once felt like a museum of old memories suddenly felt different, not healed yet, but no longer empty. Healing did not arrive all at once. It came slowly in uneven steps that sometimes moved forward and sometimes slipped backward again. During the first week, Hannah spoke very little at school. Her teacher described her as polite and quiet, the kind of student who watched everything carefully before raising her hand. She kept a small notebook in her desk, where she drew pictures whenever the classroom grew loud. Many of the drawings showed the same 3 figures that had appeared on Cole's refrigerator. At home, the changes were easier to see. Hannah laughed more often when Rusty chased toys across the living room. She began helping Cole in the kitchen, carefully measuring flour while baking cookies on Saturday afternoons. But certain habits revealed the parts of her that still expected danger. She checked the front door lock every night before going to bed, sometimes twice, occasionally 3 times. And if someone raised their voice on television even during a movie, she would freeze suddenly, shoulders tightening, as if bracing for something unseen. Cole noticed all of it. He never pointed it out directly. Instead, he simply stayed nearby, letting the quiet stability of routine slowly replace the uncertainty she had lived with for so long. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled across the city, shaking the tall windows with flashes of lightning. Cole was reading in the living room when he heard a soft knock on the doorframe. Hannah stood there, clutching a blanket. "Can I sit here for a little while?" she asked. Cole smiled gently. "Of course." She curled up on the couch beside Rusty, pulling the blanket around her shoulders as thunder rolled through the distance. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "Did your daughter get scared during storms?" Cole looked at the rain streaking down the glass. Every time he said, "She used to sit in the hallway until it passed." Hannah nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like a good idea." For a moment, neither of them said anything else. Then Hannah leaned against Rusty and whispered something so quietly, Cole almost didn't hear it. "Thank you for not sending me away." Cole didn't answer right away. He simply watched the storm move slowly across the sky, realizing that some kinds of trust took time to grow. But when they did, they changed everything. Spring arrived gradually in Portland, replacing the gray snow clouds with pale sunlight. that reflected softly across the wet streets. By March, the neighborhood looked different. Small flowers pushed through the thawing soil along the sidewalks, and the air carried the quiet promise of warmer days ahead. Inside the glass house at the end of the street, Hannah's presence had begun to reshape daily life in ways that neither she nor Cole fully expected. The refrigerator door had filled with more drawings, bright crayon pictures of dogs, houses, and people holding hands. One afternoon, Hannah came home from school carrying a folded flyer from her teacher. She sat at the kitchen table while Cole prepared dinner and carefully smoothed the paper flat. "What's that?" he asked. "Our class concert," Hannah said, tracing the words with her finger as she read. "Families are invited." She hesitated on the last word, her expression thoughtful. After a moment, she looked up at him. "Can I ask you something?" Cole turned from the stove. "Sure." Hannah swung her feet slowly beneath the chair. "Mr. Harrington sounds like something the principal says when kids are in trouble." Cole smiled slightly. "I suppose it does." She took a breath, gathering courage the way children often do before asking an important question. "Is there something else I could call you?" The room seemed to grow very quiet. Cole leaned against the counter, unsure what the next moment might bring. Like what he asked softly. Hannah looked down at the table for a second before answering. "Maybe Dad. Just sometimes." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Cole crossed the room slowly and knelt beside her chair so she didn't have to look up. His voice carried an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "I would like that very much." Hannah's answering smile was small but bright, the kind that grows from trust rather than certainty. Outside the window, Rusty barked at a passing squirrel, sending laughter across the kitchen. In that moment, Cole realized something that surprised him. The house he once believed would remain filled only with memories had become something else entirely. Not a replacement for the past, but the beginning of a future neither of them had expected. A soft wind moved through the cemetery on the edge of Portland, carrying the quiet scent of wet earth and early spring flowers. The sky above was pale and open, the kind of sky that seemed to stretch endlessly, without deciding whether the day would become bright or gray. Cole Harrington walked slowly along the narrow stone path, one hand holding a bouquet of white lilies, while the other rested loosely in his coat pocket. Beside him, Hannah walked with smaller, careful steps, clutching a bundle of purple wildflowers she had picked from the small market near their neighborhood. Rusty trotted quietly behind them, his usual energy softened by the calm stillness of the place. Hannah had asked about Maddie weeks earlier when she first saw the photograph in the kitchen, but Cole had waited before bringing her here. Some memories needed the right moment to be shared. They stopped before two simple headstones placed side by side beneath a tall maple tree, whose branches were just beginning to show tiny green leaves. Cole knelt first, gently placing the lilies in front of the stone that carried his daughter's name. For a moment he said nothing. The silence was not heavy the way it had once been. It felt quieter now, like a pause between chapters rather than the end of a story. Hannah stepped forward next. She knelt awkwardly, brushing away a few fallen leaves before laying the wildflowers beside the lilies. Her small hands moved carefully, with the kind of respect children instinctively show when they sense something important, even if they don't fully understand it yet. After a moment, she reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out something Cole hadn't noticed before. It was the thin purple hospital bracelet she had worn the night they met. The plastic band was slightly faded now, the black marker numbers beginning to blur. Hannah placed it gently beside the flowers. Then she whispered softly, almost shyly, "I don't need this anymore." Cole watched quietly, unsure what she would say next. Hannah looked at the headstone and spoke again, her voice barely louder than the wind. "Thank you for sharing your dad with me." The words landed gently in the air between them. Cole felt his throat tighten, the familiar ache of loss mixing with something warmer he had not expected to feel again. When Hannah stood, she slipped her small hand into his without hesitation. They walked back down the stone path together, leaving the flowers behind beneath the quiet maple tree. For the first time in years, the past felt less like a weight and more like a memory carried forward. Weeks passed quietly after the visit to the cemetery, each day settling into a rhythm that slowly turned the unfamiliar house into something that felt more like home. Spring sunlight filled the tall windows most mornings, now warming the hardwood floors and chasing away the last traces of winter's gray silence. Hannah's presence had changed the space in ways Cole never anticipated. There were sneakers by the door, a pink backpack hanging from the hallway hook, and crayon drawings covering nearly half the refrigerator. Rusty had claimed the living room rug as his personal kingdom, though he followed Hannah everywhere she went like a loyal guardian. One evening, while the smell of freshly baked cookies filled the kitchen, Hannah sat at the table carefully decorating one with far too many chocolate chips. Cole watched her with quiet amusement while wiping flour from his hands. "That one might break the record," he said, nodding toward the overloaded cookie. Hannah giggled softly. "Rusty doesn't mind." Rusty wagged his tail in immediate agreement. After a moment, Hannah grew thoughtful again, the way she often did when something important was turning in her mind. She looked up from the cookie and asked, "Do families have to look the same to be real?" Cole paused, slightly surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" Hannah shrugged, tracing circles on the table with her fingertip. "Some kids at school say families are supposed to have moms and dads and kids that all match." Cole considered the words carefully before answering. "Families are people who choose to take care of each other," he said finally. "Sometimes that looks different for everyone." Hannah nodded slowly, as if weighing the idea in her head. Then she smiled suddenly, the kind of smile that arrived without warning. "Good," she said. Cole raised an eyebrow. "Why good?" Hannah slid off the chair and walked over to him. She wrapped her arms around his waist in a quick, shy hug before looking up at him with bright, certain eyes. "Because I think ours works just fine." Cole laughed quietly, pulling her into a gentle embrace while Rusty circled excitedly around their legs. Outside the window, the last colors of sunset faded into evening, but inside the kitchen, the light remained warm. Sometimes healing did not arrive with grand moments or dramatic declarations. Sometimes it appeared in the form of simple laughter, shared meals, and a small voice that finally believed it had found a place to stay. The porch where everything began looked different now. The winter snow had long since melted away, replaced by the soft green of early summer grass and the quiet hum of neighborhood life returning to normal. Cole stood there one evening, watching the sun sink slowly behind the row of houses across the street. The wooden railing was still the same. The old flower pot where Hannah had hidden that first morning still sat in the corner. But the memory of that cold winter day felt distant now, like something that belonged to another life. Behind him, the front door opened with a cheerful burst of noise. Dad Hannah's voice carried across the porch as she ran outside holding a sheet of paper above her head. Rusty followed close behind, barking enthusiastically. Cole turned, smiling as she handed him the paper. It was a drawing from school. 3 figures stood in front of a bright yellow house beneath a wide rainbow. One figure was tall, one was small. A large brown dog stood proudly between them. Above the picture, Hannah had written 4 simple words in careful letters. "Our family." Cole studied the drawing for a long moment before handing it back to her. "That's a pretty good artist," he said. Hannah beamed proudly. "My teacher says I'm getting better every day." She ran back inside to tape the drawing beside the others on the refrigerator. Cole remained on the porch for a moment longer, looking out across the quiet street where he had once nearly walked past a child who needed help. 3 years earlier, he had believed his life had ended the night he lost his wife and daughter. But standing there now, listening to Hannah laugh inside the house, he understood something different. Life did not always rebuild itself the way we expected. Sometimes it grew again in places we never planned to look. Cole stepped back inside and closed the door behind him. The house was no longer silent. Hannah's laughter echoed through the hallway, while Rusty's tail thumped against the wall and the smell of cookies drifted from the kitchen. Warm light filled every room, and for the first time in years, Cole Harrington no longer felt like he was living inside the shadow of what he had lost. Because sometimes the world we are meant to save is much smaller than we imagine. Sometimes it is simply the child sitting quietly on a porch, hoping someone will finally notice. Cole looked toward the refrigerator where Hannah was proudly taping her new drawing beside the others. Then he smiled and said the words that now felt completely natural. "Dinner's ready, kiddo." And together they stepped into the life they had built, not from blood, but from choice, courage, and the simple decision to stay when someone needed them most. Did this story leave a lasting impression on you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tap the end screen to see another heartwarming story waiting for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, then tap the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Until our